Ugh. How's it going, everybody? Welcome to Meconomist. Shoot, I left my notes back here. Anyways, what I have in my hands here is the definitive checklist for the potential Porsche Cayman buyer. Now, this list has three basic sections. There's the money section, then there's the lifestyle section, and then the last section is, are you sure that you really want a Porsche Cayman? Basically, this checklist is the sort of things that I would ask or suggest to a friend or acquaintance who came up to me and said, hey, Noah, I'm thinking about maybe buying a Porsche Cayman. Do you think this would be the right car for me? Now, of course, I can only speak from personal experience. I'm by no means an expert, so take everything I say with a big grain of salt. And since I've only ever bought and owned one Cayman, my first generation 2007 base Cayman, that's pretty much what I'm talking about in this video. If you want to buy a similar Cayman to the one that I have, if you can check off at least 50% of the items in each section of this list, then you are probably a good fit for a Porsche Cayman. So let's get into it, and we'll start with the first section, which is money. Now, I've had quite a lot of people come up to me and say, hey, I really like your car, Noah. How much money do I need to make per year in order to afford a car like that? And while that's a valid question, it is a little bit more complicated than just how much money do you make every year. So I'm going to give you a number here, but please don't take it too seriously because everybody's financial situation is going to be completely unique, and there's going to be some people that make over $100,000 that probably can't afford a Porsche Cayman like this because they have kids and a mortgage and student loan debts and other priorities in their budget. And there might be people who make way less than the number that I'm going to give that have no expenses at all. Maybe they don't have to pay rent, maybe they already have all their debts paid off, and so they have a lot of free disposable cash that they can spend on a car like this. However, if you put a gun to my head, I would say if you make less than about $60,000 per year in the United States, then I wouldn't say you can't buy the car, but I would have more questions, just to make sure that they're not going to overextend themselves in terms of their budget. Now, I want to emphasize that I am not a qualified financial advisor. I don't have any kind of qualifications really to be giving financial advice at all. This is just coming from personal experience. And again, it's like if I was just talking to a friend or an acquaintance trying to give my personal advice. I almost didn't put a number at all in this video for gross annual income because what's far more important than that is your cash flow. So the next thing on the checklist is, do you have at least enough cash to cover a 20% down payment on the car that you want if you're financing it? If you can pay for the whole thing in cash, that's even better, but I suspect most people are going to end up financing their car in one way or another. My car cost about $20,000 when I bought it, and so I made sure that I had over $4,000 to put as a down payment on the vehicle. That down payment is basically going to protect you from ever going underwater on the vehicle or ever being upside down. Now, in case you don't know what that means, because it's a little bit of a financial jargon, which is totally okay, basically being underwater or upside down means that the value of the car is less than the amount of money that you owe on it, which is a bad situation you don't want to get into because that means even if you sold your car at the market price, you would still owe money on that car. A 20% down payment on a Porsche Cayman like mine is basically going to guarantee that you won't be upside down or underwater on your payments. Speaking of payments though, if you are going to finance your car, I would recommend that you have a credit score over 700. Now, why is a credit score so important? Even if you can make the payments with a bad credit score, you're probably going to end up paying way too much and the banks are going to find an easy way to screw you over. If you do have a good credit score and you're financing 80% or less of the price of the vehicle, you can probably get your payment into the $300 to $400 a month range, and that's a much more comfortable financial situation for most people, I would assume. The next item on the list is, do you have at least $200 in free disposable income per month that you can spend on your car on top of whatever finance payments you're making? That $200 in disposable income is basically there to cover your insurance and sort of miscellaneous costs that come up every month. That $200 doesn't account for the fact that you're going to have to spend a lot more money on premium gasoline for a Porsche Cayman. Your gas mileage might not be as good as your current car, although it is pretty efficient as far as two-seater sports cars go. The next item on the list is, do you have at least $1,000 in liquid savings that you can spend on any kind of sudden expense that comes up? Now, I know most Americans don't have that much in savings, unfortunately, but it is the reality, so I have sympathy if you don't have that much money in the bank. But if you can't keep that amount of money in the bank, then maybe a Porsche Cayman isn't quite right for you yet. Now, the only situation where it could be okay to not have that much in savings would be if you have a second form of transportation that you can go to if your Cayman is incapacitated for a certain amount of time. So if your Cayman is only a secondary form of transportation, you don't need it every day, then sure, if it breaks down, maybe it's not the biggest deal. The next item is, can you afford to spend another $1,000 or more on basic parts and service throughout the year? So this is going to be just sort of annual things that are going to come up, like tires, brakes, windshield wipers, and things like that. So I'm going to guess any Porsche Cayman owner out there is going to end up spending around $1,000 or so on just sort of miscellaneous things that come up. If you have a good independent shop that will give you a good price, maybe it'll be less. If you can do a lot of the work yourself, then even better. Maybe you won't have to spend any money except for like oil and stuff like that. But on the other hand, if you put a lot of miles on your car, then it might be a little bit more than that. Again, that's just kind of a ballpark area, $1,000 a year on miscellaneous expenses. Now, the last thing on the money list is, can you take about $1,000 in depreciation per year on top of those other costs? For example, my car over the past 3 years has lost about $3,000 or $4,000 in value. Now, if you're not planning to sell the car anytime soon, then maybe you won't worry about it at all. That's kind of my situation. I plan on keeping it for a while, so the depreciation doesn't really bother me that much. But if you're thinking that you might want to trade it in soon, then just keep in mind that it is going to depreciate over time. Now onto the lifestyle section, which is basically, is the Porsche Cayman a good fit to the way that you are living your life right now? The first item on the list is, if this is going to be your only car, can you live with only being able to take one passenger at a time? But I am being a little bit of a hypocrite because I do have a video out there of me putting my girlfriend and her sister into the car at the same time as me. But I really don't recommend it. It really does not work well. So just keep in mind, if this is going to be your only form of transportation, you really will only be able to have one other person in the car at a time. The next item on the lifestyle list is, do you have a safe place to park your Cayman at night? A garage is ideal. I keep mine in sort of a parking structure at my apartment building, never had any problems. If you don't have a garage or anything like that, then make sure that at least your neighborhood is safe and well lit, so that you don't end up with any kind of theft attempts on your Porsche Cayman. The next item is, if you live in a snowy climate and you plan on driving in the winter, do you have a place where you can store a second set of tires? Now, for anybody driving a sports car or any car in the winter, I always recommend having winter tires. Personally, I just store my second set at my parents' house and it works out just fine. The next item on the lifestyle section is, are you willing to sacrifice a lot of modern comforts? So my Cayman lacks a lot of things that you'll get used to if you're driving a car from the past 2 or 3 years. For example, my car has no Bluetooth, no aux cable, no USB cable, no rear camera, no lane keep assist, no park assist, none of that stuff that you're used to if you're driving a more contemporary car. The next item on the list is, are you willing and able to drive manual every day? So you can go with the Tiptronic automatic, but I never recommend that because I don't think you're getting the full Porsche experience unless you're driving a manual. The exception would be if you have some kind of disability that means you can't drive manual, then sure, go with the Tiptronic. That's what's right for you. But if this is going to be your daily driver, or if you're going to be driving it frequently, just make sure that you are willing and able to drive a manual. The next item is very important, and that's, do you have a good place in your area to get your vehicle serviced? I highly recommend that you stay loyal to the place that you find, because you really will get better treatment. I've been working in dealerships in my day job for about 3 years now, and I can tell you from personal experience that the loyal customers that keep coming back and spending money at the same place get way better treatment than just the customer that comes in once because that place happens to have a special that's cheaper than all the other places that particular day. Lastly, for the lifestyle section is, do you have a good car culture where you live? Now, this obviously isn't necessary, but it really will enhance the ownership experience, which is why I included it on the list. Personally, I've learned so much from people that I've met at just random cars and coffee meets or other sort of Porsche meetups. Because when you go to these things, you're going to find that there's people there that know way more about your car than you do, and they'll be happy to tell you about it. I've met lots of really nice, friendly people that have given me advice and pointers and just interesting stories about Porsche and about Porsche Caymans that I never knew before. So one way to really enhance your ownership experience with the Porsche Cayman is to make sure you have a good car culture around where you are and participate in it. Now that brings us to the last section, which is, do you really want a Porsche Cayman? Now what I mean by this is, are you buying this car for the right reasons that will leave you satisfied with your purchase? First thing on this section of the list is, do you have a specific reason and purpose that you can point to for why you're buying a Porsche Cayman? Now for me, that specific purpose was I wanted an interesting car that I could make YouTube videos with. Secondarily, I wanted a car that was fun to drive and comfortable on long highway journeys. This Porsche Cayman fit those purposes perfectly. The second point is related, and that's, do you have a specific reason why you didn't choose a different car? So for me, I cross-shopped Mustangs and the new Miata, and I made sure that I had specific reasons why I didn't choose one of those two cars. The Mustangs that I looked at didn't fit my primary purpose of wanting a car that I could make interesting videos about, because there's so many great YouTubers out there that make really interesting and really informative Mustang content already, that I felt like I wouldn't really be contributing that much to the conversation because I'm a bit of a novice when it comes to Mustangs, and it wouldn't help me build a niche in the YouTube space. That doesn't mean that it's not a great car, but it just wasn't the right car for my specific purpose. Additionally, to be honest, I just couldn't find any Mustangs in my area that were in my price range, had a manual transmission, and were blue. It was surprisingly hard to find that combination, so I didn't go with the Mustang for that reason as well. The Miata was fun. I had a great time test driving it, and I really liked it, especially coming from an old NA Miata, but it wasn't nearly as practical as the Cayman, and it wasn't nearly as comfortable on the sort of long highway drives that I was anticipating doing with the car. The next point is, I don't think you should buy a Cayman just because you couldn't afford what you really wanted. So to explain this, let me tell you what my situation was just about 4 years ago. At that point, I'd owned my Miata for a little while, and of course I was perusing Craigslist and Auto Trader and everything, looking for something to upgrade into. I love my Miata, but as car enthusiasts, you know how it goes. So I've always had in my mind that I wanted to own a Porsche ever since I was little. And at the time, my budget really only justified something like a 924 or a super early Porsche Boxster that has all kind of issues and things that I wasn't quite sure I could afford, even if I could afford the initial sale price. So I decided not to buy a Porsche at that time because I couldn't afford what I really wanted, which was a 987 generation or later Porsche Cayman or Porsche Boxster. So if you're in a situation where maybe you're looking at a 911 or maybe a more recent generation of Porsche that's more expensive but is still just out of your reach in terms of what you can afford, but a 987 Cayman is something you could afford and would get you into a Porsche, I'm not sure that's quite right, because you might feel like you've settled for something less than ideal. And then you'll end up thinking, well, if only I had saved up another year or so, then I could have afforded what I really wanted, but now I've got this car and all my money is getting put into this car and I can't afford what I really want next. I don't think you want to be in that situation. So if the Cayman would be something you're just settling for because you can't quite afford what you really want, then maybe it's not the right car for you. The next thing on the checklist is you have to be comfortable with the perception people have of Porsche and of early Porsche owners. Most other Porsche Cayman owners I've met fall into either one of two categories. They're either like me, a young professional who just got into Porsche ownership and they bought it secondhand because it's the best Porsche they could afford at the time. The other most common category I've found is sort of older people who bought a Porsche Cayman when it was brand new and have just kept it since then. Both categories of people are down-to-earth, genuine people and do not fit the sort of exterior stereotype that tends to surround Porsche owners in general. Because in reality, there is a bit of a stigma that comes with owning a Porsche that you're just going to have to live with. Most people who don't know cars well will not realize how old and cheap a first-generation Cayman really is, which is why some of them will think you're just some kind of stuck-up trust fund kid or something like that. That's not everybody, but people do tend to think that I'm way richer than I am just because of the car that I drive. A few people have also asked me if this is my dad's car or something like that, which shows that they really don't know my dad very well. As an aside, it's my mom that's really the Porsche enthusiast that got me into Porsches in the first place. Other people, usually parents, will perceive that if you're young and buying a Porsche, then you're being irresponsible with your money. I disagree. I think you can be very financially responsible and still be able to afford a nice Porsche Cayman like this. Lastly on this point, some women, and probably some men too, might think that you're compensating for something, if you know what I mean, by driving around a car like this. Maybe you are, maybe you're not, whatever. You're just going to have to be secure enough in yourself to deal with the fact that that sort of perception is going to come up. Then there's the added stigma of owning a Porsche Cayman from 10 years ago, if you're buying one like mine. This is specifically a stigma from people who know cars well enough to know that the first-gen Cayman is not that expensive. These are not the car enthusiast people that you really want to hang out with, but some of them might think that you're some kind of poser. Even people on YouTube comments shockingly say stuff like that. Personally, I don't really care. This isn't a real Rolex either. I just like that it was in my budget, it works well, and it looks decent. Same goes for my car. I'm perfectly open with the fact that this is not an expensive car, this is not a real expensive watch. This jacket did not cost a lot. My shoes are from Macy's and my pants are from H&M. It doesn't really matter. Some people might have some insecurities about that though, and if you're one of those people, then maybe a 10-year-old Cayman is not the right car for you. Lastly, there is a little bit of stigma around the Boxster/Cayman body style. It's pretty common knowledge that the Boxster in particular gets labeled as a, quote, hairdresser's car. Now, if you think about it, that's really not an insult unless you're extremely sexist, because, I mean, if you're a hairdresser driving a Porsche, you're probably one of the most successful hairdressers in town. Now, the Cayman has a little bit less of this sexist stigma because sometimes it is perceived as a little bit more of the serious of the two entry-level Porsches, but it does still carry some of that over from its sister car, the Boxster. You should just remind yourself that anybody who's actually driven any Boxster or any Cayman knows that it's actually one of the best two-seater sports cars out there, and there's absolutely no shame in owning one, even if it's from a super old generation. The next item on the checklist is kind of the flip side of that point, which is don't buy a Porsche Cayman just for the perceived image that it'll give you. Sure, I'll admit, for me, part of the allure of the Cayman was the prestige of the Porsche brand. I'm not going to deny that. However, you'll notice pretty quickly that most people just don't give a shit. For about 90% of the people out there, whether you're driving a Porsche or a Toyota, it's not going to change their opinion about you one way or the other in any way whatsoever. So if you're buying a Porsche because you think it'll give you some kind of improved status or image, or you're going to be able to flex on everybody, that's probably not the right reason to buy it. For women, it's probably even less likely to change their minds. And that brings me to my next point, which is do not buy a Porsche Cayman, or any car for that matter, because you think it'll attract women. Trust me, most women only care about your car to the extent that it shows you have a decent job. In fact, a clean apartment with clean sheets, a made bed, the toilet seat down, and a full refrigerator will go much farther to getting you laid than owning a Porsche. So, do not buy a Porsche Cayman just because you think it'll help you attract women. If you're into men, it's a whole different story. Especially if you're a woman who's attracted to men and wants to attract more men, a Porsche Cayman will more than do the job. That being said, I still don't think that's a good reason to buy one. Also, don't buy a Porsche Cayman just to keep up with the Joneses or impress your friends. All of my friends do not care that I own a Porsche Cayman at all. They like me for my personal traits and because I think I'm a pretty loyal and good friend, not because of what I own. So if you're trying to impress your friends, buying them a drink and spending time with them, doing things that they like, is going to go much farther than any kind of material items that you own. And keeping up with the Joneses is just a dumb idea to begin with, because you'll never be happy, and there's always going to be something that your neighbor owns that you don't own that's going to make you feel inferior if you get into that kind of mindset. And that brings me to the final item on the Porsche Cayman potential buyer's checklist. Do you recognize your own privilege? I think this is important because it will go a long way in determining how happy you will be with yourself after buying a Porsche Cayman. Recognize that if you're in a position in life to be buying a car like a Porsche Cayman, you're in a very privileged place. Maybe you're not in the 1%, but you're definitely way above the middle at this point if you can buy a Porsche Cayman. The more I remind myself of my privilege, the easier it becomes to enjoy the things that I already have, and the easier it is to be happy with myself. Don't get me wrong, I'm an ambitious person too. I do have goals and future things that I strive for that motivate me. But I also remind myself that being in the position that I am right now is a huge privilege, and it isn't all on me either. One of my favorite phrases is, if there's a turtle on a fence post, you know it didn't get there by itself. Giving yourself that perspective every now and then will renew your satisfaction that you made the right choice and help you not get bored with your Cayman and keep looking on to the next thing. So that's the end of the checklist for the potential Cayman buyer. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you'd like to see the entire checklist all together, I will put it in the description, and I will put it on my Instagram page so you can reference it anytime you want. Don't forget to like and subscribe on this video. Let me know what you thought in the comments. And I have a new t-shirt that I made. It's a Tax the Rich t-shirt. So if you'd like to purchase this, I will make sure I put a link in the description to it on my Redbubble account. And of course, I have my Porsche Cayman Flatagonia shirt available as well. So check those out if you're interested. Make sure you subscribe. And now I'm repeating myself, so I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks.